So we need to have some circle information here. The form of a circle equation. And hopefully you looked at why this was true in class. It has to do with Pythagorean theorem and graphing a circle and looking at how those work in the radius. So this is the radius. This is h and k, where the vertex, not the vertex, okay, think of parabola, where the center is h and k. Now, just like the parabola, do you see this guy is with the x? So we take the opposite. This is actually hanging out with the y this time. So we also take the opposite, because what we want to do is we want to zero these things out. So we always want to make sure that we're finding an x value for our center that makes those guys zeroed out. And then this here is our radius, so the r is equal to the radius. Now notice this does say radius squared, so we need to consider that. So let's go ahead and look at the example that we have here. The first thing that we really need to do is to kind of put them into the same spots. We're going to put the x's where the x's go. I left a little space there if you notice. We're going to put the y's where the y's go. And then I'm going to go ahead and move over the 36. So for this little spot here, we need to divide this by 2 and square it. So I'll put that over here. We're going to take our divide by 2, which is 6, and then square it, which equals 36. So this magical number is we created it. And the reason we're creating it is we want to make it so that when we factor it, it ends up being this nice little factoring. And if you multiply that out, you'll get this value here. So we're going to do the same thing with this guy here. So I'm going to take my 24, divide by 2, square it, and I'm going to go ahead and add it into that little spot there. Again, making it in such a way that when I factor it, it ends up being y plus 12 times y, y minus 12 times y minus 12. Again, we need to make sure that you do have the sign in the middle there. And that is equal to, so here's the problem. You know what, I didn't even do this in a very good order. If I add a 36 on this side, I can't just add something to one side. Some of you hopefully were thinking that. I can't just add it to one side. I have to, at the very same time, add it to the other side. Same thing with the 144. In order to keep the scales balanced, I need to also add a 144 over here. So those cancel each other out. You're left with this. So my center is at 612, because it's the opposite and it's the opposite. And then my radius is equal to 12, because the square root of 144 is actually 12. So that's kind of some basics. Now we're looking at applying that in number 1 here. So I have x squared plus 4x, and then I'm also going to move the y squared, and I'm going to move the 3. So I just moved it over, which means I'm not changing any signs here. This one I actually moved it to the other side, which remember you need to do the opposite. So I divide this by 2 and square it, which gives me a 4, and right away this time, got to get in the mode here, I'm going to add a 4 to the other side. And then I divide this by 2 and square it. I divide it by 2, I get 3. 3 squared is 9. So I add it right to the other side as well. Again, keeping it balanced, adding it to both sides. So when I factor this, I get that. And when I factor this, I get that. And again, you can do diamond problem, whatever, but ultimately what happens if you create it the right way, that the square root of that, the square root of that, the sine of that, the square root of that, the square root of that, the sine of that, always works. So you can start to get into a little bit of a quicker way of doing this once you get to know how to do it. So then we have 9 plus 7 is 16. So the radius is 4. The center is opposite and opposite. And that is in graphing form. I'm not going to rewrite that. So we have negative 2, 1, 2, 3. And then we have a radius of 4. And we just draw it as best as we can. And that's about as good as I can do for a circle for right now.